In this section, we're going to walk through the installation process of getting Flutter up and running on a Windows-based machine. The first thing we're going to do is open up our browser and navigate to flutter.io. Once there, I'll find the blue Get Started button right on the center of the screen. Then I'll select Install on Windows. So there's two separate steps of installation that we're going to go through. The first thing we have to do is set up the Flutter SDK, which is going to allow us to create new Flutter applications and run them on our local machine. After we do that, we'll then do some setup for the Android emulator, which is going to allow us to run our Flutter applications directly on our machine, rather than requiring some outside separate device, although you certainly can use a separate device if you want to. I'm going to scroll down a bit and find the section marked Get the Flutter SDK. You'll see that there's a zip file right here for download, so go ahead and download this zip file. Now I've already downloaded it. I've got it over here. I'm going to drag this zip file over to some workspace directory on my machine. Now, this doesn't have to be called like literally workspace. This will be just any folder on your local machine where you usually work with code. So I'm going to move this zip file over, and then I will extract it here at this location. All right, so that'll take just a second to extract because there's quite a large number of files inside there. So while that's going, we're going to move forward. And we're going to take a look right here at the update your path variable. So at some point in the future, you and I are going to you might notice that the directions right here say, oh yeah, you could start Flutter by double clicking flutter console.bat. Well, we don't really want to go through that path in general. What we want to do is be able to use Flutter directly from our command line, be it the command prompt or PowerShell or git bash or whatever it is that you might use in particular. So to do so, we need to now add Flutter. So that file that we just extracted, here's the folder, it's now fully extracted right here. We need to add this thing to our path variable on our machine. And so we're going to follow these directions right here for updating your path variable. To do so, we can open up our control panel. I'll then find user accounts. I'll find user accounts again. And then on the left-hand tab over here, you'll see Change My Environment Variables. And so we're going to add an environment variable that points at this Flutter directory right here. So I'll click on Change My Environment Variables. And then on this window that pops up, I'm going to find the selection for Path right here. And we're going to try to edit that. So now in this list, I'll click on New, and we'll type out the path to this Flutter directory, or more specifically, a very special folder in this directory called the bin folder. And so the easiest way to do this is to find the bin folder inside this new Flutter directory that was just created. And then we can cut or copy this entire path right here and paste it in as a new entry for the path variable. So I've now got workspace Flutter and then specifically bin in there. So then click on OK. And OK again, and then I can close my control panel. Okay, so that's pretty much it for setup on the Flutter side of things. Now we do have to reboot Windows to actually apply this change and make that change to the path variable kick in. So at this point, I would encourage you to pause right here and restart your machine, and then join me in the next section. In the last section, we installed the Flutter SDK on our local machine. We also set up a path variable, which is going to allow us to execute Flutter from our command line, or PowerShell, or git bash, or whatever it is that you use. So hopefully you just restarted your machine. If you now open your command line back open, you should be able to execute the command Flutter, and then see a list of different commands that are available to us appear. If you see a message that says command not found or command not recognized, chances are that something went wrong while you were setting up your path variable. And so you'll want to double check how you just set up your path variable. Again, you'll want to make sure that you're pointing at your bin directory. All right, so now that we've got that done, we're going to use this new Flutter command line tool to generate a new application that we're going to be making use of in just a moment. So at my terminal, I'm again inside of a workspace directory of sorts. This does not have to be called specifically workspace. That's just the folder that I use to put all my code in on my local machine. And so anywhere on your computer that you want to put your code, you can change into that folder. And then we're going to generate a new Flutter application by running the command flutter create pix. Now Pix right here is the name of the project that we're going to create. And as you might guess, the first project we're going to work on is going to work a little bit around with pictures. So I will run that command. That will generate the project, and then it's going to automatically install some different dependencies to that project as well. So if I now list out all the files and folders inside of this directory, you'll see that there's now a Pix folder in there. If I change into that Pix folder, I can list out my files and folders again, and I'll see a couple of different files and folders. This is all the pre-generated code that comes along anytime that we create a new project. So that's it. We've got a new empty Flutter application ready to go. Now, the last thing we have to do is get an Android emulator up and running on our machine so we can actually run and test out this application. So that's going to be the last step that we have to go through. In this section, we're going to, one last thing here, we're going to start downloading the Android Studio, which is what we're going to use to set up our Android emulator. And then as soon as we start the download, it's going to take a couple of minutes to download. So I'll let you kind of start it up and then we'll take a break into the next section. So again, at flutter.io, I'm going to find the section marked install Android Studio right here. And then we are prompted to download and install the Android Studio. And so you can follow that link. And right here, right in the center of the screen, we're looking for download Android Studio. So go ahead and go through that process, download that file, and then I'll catch you in the next section. Hopefully you had some success downloading the Android Studio at the end of the last section. So I've now got this executable file that is the Android installer. I'm going to double click this and we'll walk through the installation process. Now I do have to let you know that installing this thing takes just a couple minutes, so we're basically just going to start up the installation and then take a quick pause and continue in the next section once the installation is complete. All right, so we're going to go through next. We're going to make sure that we install both Android Studio, and we do in fact want Android virtual device as well. I'll hit next, next, and install, and that's pretty much it. All right, so again, this is going to take a couple minutes, so we'll pause right here, and we'll come back together in the next section once the installation is complete. I've now completed the installation of the Android Studio. I'm now getting prompted right here when I try to start it up, I'm being asked if I want to import any settings. We don't want to import any settings, so I will leave Do Not Import Settings checked, and I'll click on OK. And then Android Studio is going to start up. All right, so we're going to see a lot of additional stuff that we need to download here. So unfortunately, we're going to go through a couple steps. We'll take a pause to download a bunch of stuff and then repeat the process 1 or 2 times. But don't worry, we'll get through this together. So I now see this wizard appear right here. I'll hit next. I'm going to select standard. I'll hit next again. Now it's prompting me here to ask if I want to use some particular theme. We are not going to use Android Studio for writing code here. So pick whatever theme you want. We're not really going to be using it. So here we go. It's now asking me to download an additional 1 GB worth of files. So I'll click on finish, and that's going to start out the download process again. So once again, we'll take another pause and continue in the next section. All right, it took a little bit of time, but we now got the Android Studio up and running. So I'll click on finish right here. We're then prompted with a couple different options. We're going to go ahead and start a new Android Studio project. Now again, we're not going to actually use Android Studio for anything whatsoever besides starting up a emulator. Nonetheless, this is what we have to do to actually start the thing up. So I'll click on Start a New Android Studio Project. I'll hit Next. I'll hit Next, 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 and Finish. Okay, so that gets us into the actual Android Studio main editing interface. And from there, we can attempt to generate a new Android emulator. So I'm going to give this just another second or two to run. You know what? I think that this step right here actually takes longer than I think. So we'll take another quick pause here. And once this is all done, I'll join back up with you in just a moment. All right, I now have the Android Studio up and running. I'm at the main editor interface. Now you might notice that there's a little error down here that says messages Gradle sync. And you might see this error message that says failed to build tools revision 2703. You might have a different version printed out there. If you do, that's totally fine. Now we do want to go ahead and install these build tools. So I'm going to click on install build tools right there. This is going to pop up some additional messaging. So I'm going to accept this agreement. I'll hit next. And once again, we're going to wait for some stuff to download and install. So as you might guess, whoa, this one went way faster than I expected. So that's actually pretty good. So let's just keep going. That's definitely a bonus. All right, so I'm going to click on finish right there. And then up on the top right-hand side, I'm going to look for this little kind of purple and green icon. And if you mouse over it, you'll see that it says AVD Manager. So I'm going to click on that, and that's going to pop open the wizard that's going to allow us to create the actual Android emulator and then run it. I'll click on Create Virtual Device. We then get prompted to select the screen size that we want to use for our emulator. I'm going to use a Nexus 5X. Now I encourage you to do the same as well. If you don't see 5X on this list for any reason, you can just try to find any other device listed on here that's about 5 inches large. So then I'll click Next, and then we get prompted to select a system image. I'm going to use the latest image available, so API 28 right here. I'll click on Download, and all right, here, once again, yep, there's just so much downloading and installing, so we're going to go through the installation process here. I'll click on Next, and this one is in fact going to take a couple minutes, so we'll take another pause right here and let this thing run. So quick break, and I'll see you in just a minute. In the last section, we finished up the installation of the system image. So this is the actual copy of Android that is going to be running on our emulator. I'll now select the image that I just downloaded. I'll click on Next, and then Finish. Now when you click on Finish, it might just hang for a minute or two, which is totally fine. And then you'll see the new emulator that we just put together appear right here. Now I have two just because I already previously had one emulator going. I just created another one to walk through this process with you. So now to start up the emulator, I'll find the play button on the far right-hand side. And I'll click that, and then it's going to start the emulator up. So here's the emulator window, and I'll very quickly see the application, or excuse me, the Android operating system start to boot up inside there. So now while that is starting up, I'm going to flip back over to my terminal, and we're going to get started on the process of actually booting up our Flutter application and getting it to run on this device over here. So back inside my terminal window, I'm going to first run a command to make sure that our installation process is pretty much where we expect it to be, which is essentially complete. So to do so, I'm going to run a command flutter doctor. Doctor is a command that's going to take a look at some different aspects of Flutter on your machine and make sure that everything is set up and ready to go. So I'll run this, and then it's going to print out some status information. Now you'll notice that we see first right here, Flutter. That means that we have successfully installed Flutter. You'll notice that for me, there is an exclamation point next to Android toolchain. And so the exclamation right here means that we still have a little bit of work to do to actually set this thing up. The message says, to resolve this issue, you have to run the command flutter doctor -- android - licenses. And so I'll do that right now. I'm going to run that command. So I'll just copy that, paste it down here. Again, flutter doctor -- android - licenses. I'll run it. And then we're going to see a couple of like little thingamajigs down here say, hey, do you want to accept this? So you're just going to say Y and then enter, Y then enter, Y then enter, Y then enter. And that's pretty much it. So we can now run flutter doctor again. And now we should see Flutter's good to go. Android toolchain is good to go. Android Studio is good to go. And we have a connected device. We can now run flutter devices, and it will print out the name of the Android device that Flutter is going to try to run itself on. So the Android emulator is listed right here. So I think we're ready to actually test this out and start up that application that we had previously generated using the Flutter command line tool. Now in my terminal, you'll notice that I'm inside of that Pix directory. That is the project that we generated like 3 sections ago using the Flutter SDK. So make sure that you're inside of that Pix directory, the directory that we just generated. And then once you're inside there, we'll run the command flutter run, which is how we boot up Flutter and automatically deploy the application to the emulator over here. So I'll execute flutter run. And then we're going to see a little bit of installation or setup processes right here. Again, this is going to take just a minute or two, so we'll take another quick pause and then wrap up with the entire installation in the next section. So I'll see you in just a minute. And that's it, my friends. We've got flutter run executed at our terminal that automatically built our application and deployed it to our Android emulator. So now on the screen, I see the default application that we get anytime we generate a new Flutter app. So that's pretty much it for setup. We're now ready to start developing our first application. So let's continue in the next section. We'll start talking about what we're going to build.